ჩვენი სტუმარი დღეს არის ისრაელელი მწერალი ეთგარ კერეტი, რომელსაც რადგან აქ მოხვედით ალბათ კარგად იცნობთ, მისი ორი კრებული გვაქვს ქართულად, 2007 და 2016 წლებში გამოვიდა ეს კრებულები, ორივე მათგანის თარგმნელი არის აქ და ეს არის თამარ ბაბუაძე და კითხველებში პრინციპში ძალიან საყვარელი ავტორია, საერთაშორისო დონეზეც მისი წიგნები 40-მდე ენაზე არის თარგმნილი და ძალიან ბევრ ქვეყანაში სარგებლობს პოპულარობით. და ძალიან მიხარია რომ საქართველოს არის ამ ქვეყნებს შორის ერთი რამ უნდა დავამატო სუბიექტურად რომ ეთგარ კერეტი არის ჩემი ყველაზე საყვარელი მწერალი და ძალიან რაც შეეხება მოკლე მოთხრობებს და ძალიან აღელვებული ვარ, ამიტომ შეიძლება რამე სისულელს თქვან ისე ვერ ვილაპარაკო როგორც საჭიროა, მაგრამ მე მგონი ესე გაგებით მომეკიდებით როგორც ჩვენთან მოდაშია ეს ფრაზა. მე რამდენიმე კითხვას დავსვამ დისკუსიის გასახსნელად, თამარ ბაბუაძეც ჩაერთვება ჩვენს დისკუსიაში. მაგრამ ძალიან დიდი იმედი გვაქვს ეს შეხვედრა ორგანიზებული არის იმისთვის რომ თქვენს კითხვებს უპასუხოს მწერალმა. შეგახსენებთ რომ ის პირველად იყო M Publishing-ის მოწვევით, რომელიც იყო მისი პირველი კრებულის გამომცემელი 2007 წელს საქართველოში და 9 წელი არ ყოფილა, არავინ არ იცის კიდე რამდენი წელი არ ჩამოვა, ამიტომ მაქსიმალურად დასვით თქვენთვის საინტერესო კითხვები. მე საუბარს დავიწყებ ბოლო კრებულიდან, უეცრად კარზე აკაკუნებენ და მინდა ჩვენ სტუმარს მივესალმო პირველ რიგში და ვკითხო რა არის ეს კრებული, როდის დაწერილ მოთხრობებს აერთიანებს, როგორ იწერებოდა ეს მოთხრობები და როგორ გაერთიანდა მე ისეთი სახით, როგორითაც ჩვენ დღეს გვაქვს.
This collection is a very special one for me because it's the first book I wrote after my son was born. So for me there is some kind of a transformation because I think that until the day my son was born I saw myself as a child. Regardless of age, you know, I think I wrote many stories in my life about a parent and child relationship, and it was always from the child point of view. And this book is the first time where I write stories from a parent point of view, and it took me a long time to write this collection. I think that there was this thing that when I was younger, I lived this kind of you know, like a bachelor life. I would drink, you know, go to sleep late, get fired from all kinds of jobs. So I thought my life was very interesting and I could write about them. And suddenly I found myself in a life where I have a baby and I pay a mortgage and I do all those kind of things that seemed worse than death when I was younger. So it took me a long time to believe that I can write anything of value about it. You know, it seems as if like I had the right vocabulary to describe dirty apartments, but I didn't know how to describe clean ones. You know, and suddenly I lived in a clean apartment and I didn't know what to do with it. And at that period, I almost kind of gave up on writing and I moved to filmmaking. And for a few years I didn't write. And then I think slowly I realized that what makes life interesting is not what you do, but it's your own personal subjective experience. So if you are waiting in the bank asking them for a loan and you are waiting in a queue and your experience, you know, you can feel greater anxieties than somebody who is in the jungle wrestling with a lion. It took me a long time to realize it, and when I realized it, I kind of started writing those stories, and I wrote. And I actually, when I started sitting down, I wrote this collection pretty quickly.
მე მგონი ახლა დრო არის რომ თემატურად თამართან გადავიდეთ და ვკითხოთ ორი კითხვა მინდა გავაერთიანო ერთ შეკითხვაში. თამარი პროფესიით ჟურნალისტი იყო და მუშაობდა ამ მიმართულებით, ვიდრე არ გახდა მთარგმნელი და მთარგმნელი გახდა სწორედ ეთგარ კერეტის კრებულის ნებროთმა გარეკა ამ წიგნით და მინდა ვკითხო, გაიხსენოს ეს ამბავი, როგორ იპოვა თავისი ახალი პროფესია თუ გატაცება, რომელიც მერე პროფესიად ექცა და მოდი მე დაგისვა მეორე შეკითხვას.
სწორია, მაშო ისმის ხო? თუ არის მის.
ცოტა ახლოს უნდა მიიტანო просто.
აი. ხო, ესე იგი მოკლედ არ ვიცი, ძალიან ბედნიერი ვარ რომ აქ ვარ დღეს. და აქ რო არის ეთგარი, იმიტომ რომ მისი ჩამოსვლით ჩემთვის რაღაცნაირად გვირგვინი დაესვა ერთ ამბავს, რომელიც დაიწყო ზუსტად 10 წლის წინ. ჩემთვის 10 წლის წინ დაიწყო წიგნი, თუმცა 9 წლის წინ გამოვიდა. ეს არის დრო, როცა მე ვთარგმნე მისი პირველი მოთხრობა, ეს იყო ჩემი პირველი მხატვრული ტექსტის თარგმანი და მას ერქვა Pipes, ანუ მილები. მე როცა მე ძალიან ბევრი ხნის მერე გავარკვია, რომ თურმე სწორედ ეს მოთხრობა არის პირველი მოთხრობა ეთგარისთვისაც, რომელიც 19 წლის ასაკში დაუწერია და ეს რაღაცა ჩემთვის ძალიან ისეთი ძვირფასი დამთხვევა. ხო, ეს მოთხრობა გამოქვეყნდა ჟურნალ ხელშოკოლადში, მე კიდევ მეორე მოთხრობა თარგმნე, მე გაჩნდა იდეა, რომ გამოსულიყო კრებულიც, იმიტომ რომ შორენა შავერდაშვილი იყო წასული მასთან ინტერვიუს შესაწერად, ჩამოვიდა იქიდან სრულიად აღრთოვანებული. მოკლედ ეს შორიდან შორენას გავლით ყველას ძალიან გვიყვარდა მისი ტექსტები. მე არ ვიცი, აი მაშინ ესე სერიოზულად მართლა არ ვფიქრობდი იმაზე, რომ ეს საქმე გახდებოდა ჩემთვის ძალიან მნიშვნელოვანი, თუმცა პირველი სიამოვნება თარგმნისგან სწორედ ამ ტექსტების თარგმნით მივიღე. მე უკვე მეორე კრებულიც გამოიცა, შუაში ერთის ქელტანიანი წიგნიც თარგმნე და არ ვიცი, აი მთელი ამ წლების განმავლობაში მაშინ სულ მტანჯავდა ერთი განცდა, რომ რაღაცას კარგად არ ვაკეთებ, რაღაცა სტრიქონებს შორის იკარგება, რაღაცა ისე კარგად არ მოდის ქართულად როგორც საჭიროა. მაგრამ ეხლა როცა ვესაუბრე ეთგარს, იმიტომ რომ 2007-ში რო იყო ჩამოსული, მაშინ სამწუხაროდ ვერ შევხვდი. ეს შიშები მომეხსნა და ეს სინდისის კენჭნა მომეხსნა, იმიტომ რომ ეთგარი მეუბნება, რომ ის წერს იმისთვის, რომ არ გვიყუროს პედესტალიდან, არამედ იმისთვის, რომ იყოს ურთიერთობაში ადამიანებთან. და თარგმნელი მისთვის არის ფაქტობრივად, ესე ძალიან ხმამაღლა შეიძლება ჟღერდეს ეს, მაგრამ თანაავტორი რაღაც გაგებით, იმიტომ რომ თარგმნის დროს ძალიან ბევრი რამე იცვლება და სხვანაირად, ანუ მართლა შეიძლება რომ კი არ წერდი, არამედ გადაწერდე წიგნს. ხო და ამიტომ თუ გიყვართ თქვენ ეთგარის მოთხრობები, რაღაც გაგებით შეიძლება გიყვარდეთ მეც, იმიტომ რომ ჩემი ნაწილი ძდევს ამ წიგნებში. აი ეს შემიძლია მკითხრა ამ თარგმანის შესახებ, რომელიც ჩემთვის მართლა ძალიან ძვირფასი პროცესია.
მე მგონი მე როგორც მკითხველის გეთანხმები მაგ ლოგიკაში და ეგ ტექსტებიდან ჩანს, რომ ეთგარი სავარაუდოდ ესე ფიქრობს, მე ეგ განცდა მქონდა და ნამდვილად ვისაც არ წაგიკითხავთ ეს ტექსტები ქართულ ენაზე წინ ძალიან დიდი თავგადასავალი და სიამოვნება გელით, მოდი აქვე ვილაპარაკოთ ამ კრებულზეც, რომელიც სულ ახლახანს გამოვიდა ქართულად 2 თვის წინ, თუ არ მეშლება. როგორი იყო სამუშაო პროცესი, როგორ დაიწყეს, როგორ აღმოაჩინე ეს კრებული და რატო გადაწყვიტე, რომ ქართულად არსებობდეს?
მაშო, ეს კრებული, არ ვიცი. იცი რა არის, ხوار ჯობია რომ ძალიან ისეთია, ხა მე რო ვლაპარაკობ, ბევრს გონია რომ ბევრი კითხვები ეთგარს უნდა დაუსვათ და თემატურად არაფერი აღმოვაჩინე, აღარც კი მახსოვს როგორ აღმოაჩინე. მგონი მე და შენ ვლაპარაკობდით ზუსტად და მე უბრალოდ ბაკურთან ვიყავი სტუმრად, ბაკურს ვაკავრთან და მე ესე არ ვიცი, მოხდა რომ მე მივიღე, მე მხვდა წილად ეს ბედნიერება, მართლა ბედნიერება არ არის, ხა შეიძლება პათეტიკურად ჟღერდეს, მაგრამ მართლა ჩემთვის დიდი პატივია, რომ მე მეორად მომეცა შანსი, რომ კიდევ ერთხელ მეთარგმნა მისი მოთხრობები. იმიტომ რომ მართლა საოცარი ის არის, არ ვიცი, საერთოდ თარგმანი მომწონს იმიტომ რომ თარგმნა მომწონს იმიტომ რომ ჩემი ყოველდღიური საქმიანობისგან ძალიან განსხვავდება. ჩემი საქმე მოიცავს, აი ყოველდღიური საქმე, აი ძალიან გაფანტულია და ხშირად კონცენტრირების, აი არ ვიცი, ისეთი ძალისხმევა მჭირდება, რომ კონცენტრაცია მოვახდინო რაღაც ერთ საქმეზე, იმიტომ რომ იქ ერთი ზარი, მეორე შეხვედრა, წერა, გაფანტული ვარ. და თარგმნის დროს კი ყოველთვის ვრჩებით მე და ის ტექსტი და რაღაცნაირად მისიც არის, არ ვიცი, განმარტოება და გარიყვა ყველაფრისგან და რას ჯობია სადმე ჩაძვირას, როცა ესეთი ტექსტები, არ ვიცი.
მადლობა. მე მაქვს კიდე ერთი კითხვა. თქვენი რამდენადაც მე წამიკითხავს თქვენი მოთხრობები, რაღაცნაირად თქვენი მიგნებული გაქვთ უნიკალური სტილი, რომელიც არ იცვლება, არის ძალიან ყოველდღიური, სლენგით და დიალექტით დატვირთული, თითქოს ძალიან მარტივი, მაგრამ ზუსტად რაღაცნაირად იდეალური და თავისთავად უნიკალური, იმიტომ რომ ასე მე მგონი სხვა არავინ არ წერს. როგორ მიაგენით ამ სტილს, იყო თუ არა ეს რაღაცნაირად თქვენი მიზანი, რომ ასეთი ენით გეწერათ, თუ ეს უბრალოდ შემთხვევით მოხდა და მე მივხვდით, რომ რაღაც იღბლიანად მიაგენით იმას, როგორ უნდა წეროთ.
Well, I must say that when I grew up as a child, I think that my favorite books were by Mark Twain. I loved the Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, and both of them were written in a colloquial speech. And as I grew older, I discovered writers like Bashevis Singer and Shalom Aleichem who wrote in Yiddish. And Yiddish is basically a colloquial language. It's a language that was invented because all Jews basically knew Hebrew. They knew how to read and write in Hebrew, but they thought it was not appropriate to use it as a spoken language because it's the language of God, and to ask where the toilets are in the language of God didn't seem like appropriate. So Yiddish in its essence, it's a very juicy spoken language. So I found so many things around me that were had to do with basically colloquial speech and slang. But in Israel at those years, it was very uncommon to use spoken language in writing. And I think that, whenever somebody writes in a language, there is the shadow of the greatest writer or the greatest book of this language. So I don't know if you're in Italian, there is the shadow of the Dante's Inferno, and if you're English, then there are Shakespeare's play. But if you're Israeli, it's the shadow of the Bible, And with all due respect to Dante and Shakespeare, the Bible had outsold them. And they say that the guy who wrote it had created this word in 7 days. So it's a tough competition. And I think that there is a tradition in modern Israeli writing that the written language has to be in a higher register than the spoken language. I think that, in the last 2 decades it started to change, but traditionally when you would read Hebrew, then you would compare it to the Bible, and which meant that that using the words that you actually use in everyday life would be inappropriate. And for me, it was a problem because I really love the way that Israelis communicate with each other. I talked with Tamar about it, that the story of the Hebrew language is a very unique story because when I talk to high school kids, I always say the story of this language is like the story of Captain America, because Captain America now is very popular. And Captain America was frozen in the Second World War and then defrosted, and the same thing happened to the Hebrew language. It was frozen 2,000 years ago, and then it's a very strange language because people almost arbitrarily said, we're going to return to this language, so they put it in the microwave of history and defrosted it. And at one point they said, well, let's talk to each other a language that is 2,000 years old or even 2,600 years old. And the effect was very strange because when they talked, they used an ancient language that was kept intact. Languages tend to change. I think if you take ancient English texts and, or I always say if you take Shakespeare and put him, in a subway in New York, he will find it a problem to communicate with other people. But if you take Abraham and Isaac to Tel Aviv, they'll have no problem communicating with people around them. They would dress funny and be intimidated by cars, but linguistically wise, it would be easy for them to communicate, which is a very unique case. But at the same time, when people started speaking this language, there were 2,000 years worth of words that did not exist, and it's not only cell phones, it's a water faucet, it's plastic chairs, it's all those kind of things that we've achieved in those 2,000 years. And because the language is there to communicate, then there was this urgent need to find the right words that were missing. So I think that there is something very powerful in the Hebrew slang for that reason that it's a language that it's both very ancient and holy, but at the same time very open recipient for new words. You can actually, in Hebrew, you can invent a word, and 5 years later, everybody would say it. I had this experience, and it's amazing that a language can, people are used to understanding things out of context. People are used to having words being imported from English, Arabic, Russian, Yiddish, and treating them as if it's a very natural language. I always give it as an example that when two Israelis, they say goodbye, they say 3 words. They say, Tov, Yalla, bye. Now, Tov is like, okay, good, but Tov, it's not only an ancient word, it's an extremely ancient word. It's from the first chapter of the Bible, because when God created the word, he saw it was good, Vayar Elohim ki Tov. So it's a super ancient word, but then the second word, yalla, is basically vamos in Arabic, and bye is in English. But if you ask any Israeli, what language did you speak? He said, I spoke Hebrew. I said, tov, yalla, bye. So this ability to put side by side an ancient biblical word and words from Arabic and English, and it's really, if we talk register-wise, it's kind of a roller coaster effect. You say, you can't do it in English. You can't say a sentence that it's half the King James Bible and half a Eminem rap song, But in Hebrew, this is how people communicate. And I always felt that it really tells the true story of this country, because we're ancient. We're ancient people, but a very young country. There are very kind of religious and conservative and constraining side to our society, but there's also very chaotic and anarchistic and liberal sides to it. And this clash is something that you feel in every sentence. And it was a struggle to publish those stories and to stand by them when, at the time the Institute didn't want to accept a spoken language. But I felt that as a writer, I want to show the face of my society, and the best way to show it was by using this language. And I must say that Tamar translates me from English, but when I'm translated from Hebrew, I always get the same question from my translators. They say, "Oh, I read it, I like it, it's nice. So what do you say, up or down?" And the idea is, when they say up or down, they say, should I take all the register up, or should I take all the register down? Because this kind of acrobatic of registers that is often done in Hebrew doesn't work in any other language. You cannot have a sentence that would be half biblical and half in English and Arabic and Russian, So you have to take this conscious decision, and I feel that my stories lose a lot in translation. It's funny because when my first books came out in Israel, all the reviews, the favorable and the unfavorable, were exclusively about the language. They were exclusively about the way that I write. And when my books started coming overseas, they were usually about the plot, the characters, the ideas. But the idea of language was kind of flattened, because there is no other country in the world that has the same story. I always like to talk, when I go to Korea or to places that they don't know a lot about Israel, and I say to them, we're a crazy country, I can talk about language, or I always say that, in the US, if you write a good book, they make a movie out of it. But in Israel, if you write a good book, they make a country out of it, because people don't know it. But you know that that this country is based on, actually it's not a good book, it's a so-so book, but it's based on a sci-fi or speculative novel written by a guy called Theodor Herzl. And he said, whoa, I have this cool idea. I write a story about all the Jews coming back to the Middle East and making this country, and people read it and say, whoa, it's a great book, let's do it, And they just came and made a country. And I think that, the language, the country, the identity, there's nothing in it that reminds anything in the word, there is something, it's almost kind of like, I think that usually processes that create people and nations and languages and country, they're always very organic processes. It's like a bunch of people living together say, how about we call ourselves Georgians? Yeah, and we speak our language, and this is the way that it's done. But in the story of Israel and the Hebrew language, there's nothing like that. We're a nation, we call ourselves Jews, but the majority of us is secular, Imagine people saying, I'm a secular Orthodox, I'm a secular Christian. It's a paradox. But every second Jew that you meet in the street, you say, I'm a secular Jew. So what does it mean? Like Judaism is a belief. So I think that all this complexity of identity is very strongly represented in the language, and that's what attracted me to the colloquial speech.
თქვენ თქვით რომ ძირითადად წერენ თქვენს ენაზე და ალბათ ლოგიკურიც არის რომ ეს შეკითხვა გამიჩნდა, მაგრამ კიდევ ერთი შეკითხვა მაქვს ამ შემთხვევაში, როგორც მკითხველს, რომელიც ბევრი წელია თქვენი ტექსტებს კითხულობს და მუდმივად აწუხებდა ერთი კითხვა და ეხლა უცებად უნდა დავსვა. თქვენ გაქვთ ძალიან უცნაური უნიკალური, მე ვიტყოდი, სათაურები. მოთხრობებს აქვს ხშირად მოკლე და რაღაცა ჭუჭრუტანასავით არის ხოლმე ეს სათაურები. ერთი მხრივ გიყვება რაზეა მოთხრობა და შენ როდესაც კითხვას იწყებ, უკვე იცი რა შეიძლება მოხდეს, მაგრამ ზუსტად იმის გამო რომ ასე ქვია ამა თუ იმ მოთხრობას, შენ იწყებ ამ მოთხრობის კითხვას და ხანდახან მიფიქრია რომ მე მგონი ალბათ ეს წერალი სათაურებზე უფრო მეც ფიქრობს ვიდრე თვითონ მოთხრობაზე, თქო, იმდენად სრულყოფილი სათაურები აქვს ხოლმე თქვენს ტექსტებს. როგორ მუშაობთ სათაურებზე?
Well, for me, I think an ideal title is a title that when you read it invokes some kind of an image, but when you finish the story, you see it in a different way. Because for me, there is something that a story is like somebody you meet and becomes your friend. And when I think about my friend, the first time we met, I imagine them to be different than what they were. They were like some of their characteristics, they spoke very loudly, they were a bit vulgar, So I remember I said, who is this guy? And now, like 15 years later, when I look at them, I say, yeah, they speak loud and a bit vulgar, but this is not the thing I think about when I see them. So I feel that there is something in reading a story that you kind of create an intimacy or relationship with the story. So ideally, I try to find a title that will not be purposely misleading, that will be accurate, but the story will give you something that when you return to the title, you will see differently.
ერთი ცოტა მხიარული ამბავი უნდა მოვყვე, ვინც არიცით. ცოტა ხნის წინ ეთგარ კერეთს აქვს ძალიან აქტიური Facebook-ი, რომელიც გამოირჩევა ძალიან დახვეწილი იუმორით და არ ვიცი თუ არ ადევნებთ თვალყურს, აუცილებლად ადევნეთ, გირჩევდით და ცოტა ხნის წინ მის გვერდზე დაიდო ძალიან მეცადა ინგლისურიდან პროზაულად გადამეთარგმნა ეს წინადადება და არ ვიცი რამდენად გამომივიდა ასეთი ნიუსი, რომელიც იყო ფოტოს სახით, რომელზეც ეწერა, რომ ქალმა ჩასცა საკუთარ ქმარს ციყვი. ეს იყო ნიუსი და მისი კომენტარი იყო ფოტოზე, რომ მე ადამიანები მეუბნებიან, რომ აბსურდს ვწერო. და ძალიან ეს ვიზუალურად ძალიან საინტერესო სანახავი იყო. და როდესაც ეს ფოტო ვნახე, უკვე ვიცოდი, რომ ჩვენი სტუმარი იქნებოდა და მაშინ დავწერე გონებაში ეს შეკითხვა. ხშირად არის მის მოთხრობებში აბსურდია პრინციპში ხშირად მის მოთხრობებში თემატურად ესე შეგვიძლია ვთქვათ და მაინტერესებს მას მე რაც ეს ნიუსი ნახა და ძალიან ენამახველი კომენტარი დაუწერა, როგორ გონიათ, სად გადის ზღვარი რეალურ ცხოვრებასა და აბსურდ თქვენს ლიტერატურას შორის? საერთოდ არსებობს თუ არა ეს ზღვარი, იმიტომ რომ ეს ფოტო მხოლოდ იმას მოწმობს, რომ ასეთი რამე არ არსებობს.
I don't think I understood the question. Maybe if we would translate.
Okay, the question is about you, right? That the woman stops, this picture. And my question is, where is the line between your literature and this absurd what happens in the world? Or is this line or not?
I don't think there is a line. I think writers, it doesn't matter what they say. I think that the purpose of writing is to show the reader how you experience life. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I think that and when I write things and when I began writing, I told Tamar that the first editor who wrote my stories, he read my stories, he got them by mistake. And he wanted to publish my stories, and he called me and he said, I want to publish your stories, and I was very excited because I never thought that anybody would publish them. And then when we start talking, he said, what I like about your stories is that they are so grotesque and so absurd. And I said to him, fuck you, and I hung the phone because I felt very insulted. And then he called me again, and we talked, and he said, why are you so rude? And I said to him, what if somebody told you that your mother was grotesque and your daughter was absurd? How would you react? I write about my life, and when you say that, you insult my life, And I think that when I just started writing, I had no awareness for the fact that my stories are perceived as absurd. I was just writing about life the way that I experienced it, and I think that that I still think that life is crazier than my stories, but that I think that we are kind of being trained or indoctrinated not to see that, like horses going this way. When the moment that we see something that is utterly weird or doesn't make any sense, we tend to kind of ignore it or to create some fake context that would make sense in it, And I'm saying it's like it's enough, I don't know, to turn on the TV or to look at politics, for example. Don't you think let's say it's strange that any country probably that you look in the world, the person who leads it or intends to lead it seems to be one of the least nice, more stupid person in that country. So I think this is totally absurd. But let's say when Italian, I don't know, look at Berlusconi, they don't say it's absurd. They say, "Oh, we're so fucked," And I think that we do that all the time in life. We go through those routes, that don't make sense, and we say, "Okay, that's life." But when somebody writes it, we say, "Oh, it's absurd."
Yeah, exactly. This was my question. თქვენ ხომ არ გაქვთ შეკითხვები? უკაცრავად ჩავყვერე. დიახ, გისმენთ. დიახ, მიკროფონი.
მაინტერესებს როგორ შევხვდეთ მის ტექსტებს დასაწყისში, როცა გამოაქვეყნა და როგორია დღეს დამოკიდებულება მის სამშობლოში.
When I started publishing in Israel, there was a polemic about it. Like there were some people that liked what I did, and there were many people that thought that you shouldn't write in colloquial way, that if you write stories that are really short, that they're kind of meaningless and they're not important, or that I write about trivial issues. I think that even though many years had passed, I think that it's still they still have these two attitudes. But I think that now the people that don't like my stories are more polite when they attack them than they used to. And I think that it's totally natural for me. I think that, that a book is like a friend. We can't all be friends of everybody. I think many times you can look at somebody that you know and you say, why do you see this guy? And she'll say, oh, he's amazing. And you say, no, he's an asshole, But friendship, it's not rational, and and it's some kind of a connection between two parties. So whenever I meet people who still, really think that my stories are stupid and don't like them, I say, okay, so you're not the best friend for my stories. Maybe they should look for another friend. And I can tell you in general that I really feel that, talking about about those things that people see as trivial, but I find them really astounding. The fact that I sit in my room and I write something about my life, you know, which 5 minutes before that I try to explain to my wife and she says that I'm stupid. And then I write it, and then my expectations that somebody in a bookstore in Tbilisi will pick this thing up and pay money for it and go home, and instead of, I don't know, playing football or watching the Eurovision or compulsively masturbating, will, of all the activities presented to him, will choose to sit down and read the same things that I wanted to tell my wife and she didn't want to listen to me, then it's quite a miracle. So I think that whenever I meet people who have no interest in my stories, it seems to be the default, you know. When somebody says, I read your stories, they mean something to me, I think it's as much as a miracle as somebody falling in love with you or you falling in love with someone.
ხო, მაგრამ გაქვთ კიდევ შეკითხვა, ვიდრე ჩვენ გავაგრძელებთ? რა თქმა უნდა. მიკროფონს დაელოდეთ შეიძლება.
მაინტერესებს მისი ურთიერთობა კინოსთან. მახსოვს რამდენიმე წლის წინ კანის ფესტივალზე საკმაოდ სერიოზული ჯილდო აიღო თორწები მეუღლესთან ერთად. და ეხლა რა ხდება?
Well, the truth is that I started writing for cinema and directing to cinema for a very personal reason. Because what happened was that when I published my first 2 collections, then they had some good reviews, but I didn't have many readers. So I work in all kinds of odd jobs, you know, to make a living. And then my second collection suddenly became very popular, and I got a big advance. And my publisher said, okay, now you sit down and you write stories. And the thing about me is that I'm a very social person, and with me, writing stories come from the fact that I'm a social person and I want to communicate. But I was in a situation where I woke up in the morning and all my friends went to work, and I was sitting in a room and writing stories, but I missed all those human interactions. And then this film student told me that he wants to make a story out of a short film out of one of my stories, and he invited me to the set, and it was the first time I was in a film set. And suddenly I saw all those people that were creating something the way that I was creating a story, but they were doing it together, you know. And they were like, you know, and they were laughing together, and there were beautiful girls there, and they had a break and ate sandwiches together, and I became very jealous. So I sat down and I wrote my first screenplay. And I think that since then I have these kind of things that I both write stories and I'm involved in films. But I must say that there is something about writing stories that it's much more primal for me. But because it's lonely, then many times after I publish a collection of stories or I publish a book, I want to go out. It's like going to a party. So making a film, it's really, there is something very beautiful about it. It's because you have all those different people that they share some kind of the same cause and some great intimacy. And you know, I think, let's say when we worked on Jellyfish, I think that the editor of the film, he knew things about me that my wife didn't know because they were relevant for some scenes, you know. When I tried to explain to him something, I said, you know, when I was 6 years old, I don't know, this thing happened to me. And I still remember this, the premiere, this kind of screenings that we made for the crew. And all the people were sitting together, and like instead of watching the movie, I was watching the crew, and it was amazing because you see all those different people and they look at the screen and they feel it's their film. You know, the art director, the musician, the actor, they really feel it's their life on the screen. And it's amazing how so many people kind of share this. It's like this huge sexless orgy, you know? It's like all those people so close together, meshed into one thing, and I still love it. And currently, my wife and I, we develop a TV series. They didn't want to do it in Israel because they say it's too weird, but we're doing it for, we're trying to do it for Arte, the French TV channel. It's funny because the idea of the screenplay, not the idea, but if I tell it in a sentence, it's a story about a real estate guy that travels in time. So when I come to Israeli TV and they said, would you mind showing us a series with a similar themes that were successful? And this is when I knew that I wouldn't be able to show it, to do it in Israel. Because there are not that many TV series about real estate agents who travel in time, I'm afraid.
თამაში ხარ გაგიჩნდა შეკითხვები ამასობაში?
იცი რა არის, მე ვიცი ამაზე პასუხი, მაგრამ მგონია რომ კარგი იქნება რომ სხვებმაც იცოდნენ. რადგან ამ ფილმზე ალაპარაკი და მინდოდა დამესვა კითხვა, წერა მისთვის ძალიან ორგანული პროცესია, მაგრამ ასევე სხვა მედიუმებთან თამაშებაც უყვარს, ხო? ხო და თან ამავე დროს მე ვიცი რომ სხვებსაც ძალიან იოლად რთავს ნებას, რომ ისი ტექსტების მიხედვით რაღაცები გააკეთონ. და ამას თავისი მოტივი აქვს. ანუ არის ერთი ესეთი პატარა მოთხრობა ასთმა, რომლის მიხედვითაც თუ რომელზე დაფუძნებითაც ძალიან ისეთი საყვარელი გრაფიკაა გაკეთებული. მაგალითად, ყოველ შეუძლია რომ ნახოს. ასევე მოთხრობა აი ტიპს რო ჯიბეში უდევს ბევრი რამე. ეგეც რაღაც ვიდეოდ არის ქცეული. მაინტერესებს, მოდი გავიგოთ ყველამ, რატო აკეთებს ამას? ანუ ხო არის რომ რაღაც ის გიჩნდება, რა ვიცი, ხო არა, პატრონობის განცდა რაღაცაზე, რასაც აკეთებ და მე გეძურფასება იმდანაც რომ აღარ გინდა რომ სხვებმა დაამახინჯონ, ხო? რატო უშვებს ხელიდან ასე იოლოთ ამ ყველაფერს?
Well, you know, I think that first of all, I think that the greatest compliment for a writer is that if you do something that invokes people to do something creative. You know, I think like if somebody said, I read your story and I want to write a song based on it or inspired by it, or to, I don't know, make a ballet performance inspired by it, then I think it's really as good as it gets. But I must say that it was a very quick process for me to understand that I don't own the stories. You know, I have a story called Crazy Glue, and it was adapted. It's my most adapted story, and it's basically the plot is the story is about a couple that they have problem in their marriage, and it all comes down to this argument that they have about this crazy glue commercials that they see, because the crazy glue, like, it's a very powerful glue, and they had a commercial where somebody is glued from the ceiling. And the husband, who don't believe in the relationship anymore, basically says that it was done like Photoshop or with a trick, that it's no way that somebody was glued to the ceiling. And the wife tries to convince him that there is such a way, and when he comes back from work, he finds out that everything in his house was glued by crazy glue, that he can't lift the bottle because it was glue, he can't open the drawers, he can't pick up the phone, you know, everything has been glued. And at some stage, he looks up and he sees that his wife is glued from the ceiling, from her bare feet naked. And when he sees her, the marriage are breaking, he cheats on her, but when he sees her, he falls in love with her again, because suddenly her breasts are firm, you know, because the gravity, and her smile is powered by gravity, you know, and he sees all this, and he takes a bunch of books and puts them on top of each other, and he kisses her, and it ends that the last sentence says that when he kisses her, he feels the books falling under his feet, and that he's in the air, levitating in the air, held only by her lips. So this story was adapted to two different short movies. One of them is a romantic comedy, and the other is a horror movie. And when I see those two movies, they both make perfect sense to me, because I think it's a movie about relationship between men and women, which are both romantic comedy and a horror movie. And I think I think that, you know, when one person read it, it said, oh, it's like a Chagall painting. You know, he floats in the air and the lip, you know, and another guy says, oh, she has glue on her lips too, and gravity, and it rips his lip apart, you know. So for me, I think that when somebody adapts your work, it's as close as you get to be in your reader's mind, you know, because when somebody reads my book, I don't know how he read it, and there is about the action of reading that me and my reader, we are co-creators, because each reader imagines things differently, imagines, you know, the tone, the voice, the setting, especially in very minimalistic stories. I always say that a story is kind of, it's like a concentrated juice mixed with each reader. So some reader is water, some reader is vodka, some reader is sparkling water, I don't know. But the readings are always different, and the only way that you can perceive them is by this. And I can say to you about, I know that many times writers have a strong feeling of ownership for this text. I think that the difference is because I write short stories and I write many of them, you know, so I would imagine if I would be a writer who wrote only 2 novels, maybe I would be more possessive about them. But I can tell you that, you know, that there is the longest story I've ever written. It's Nello's Happy Campers. They made a film out of it called Wrist Cutters, a love story featuring Tom Waits, and it's a very nice movie. And when the guy who did it, Goran Dukic, worked on the screenplay, he said, I have a problem because I want to shoot the movie, but I had an idea for a different ending. And the book has a sad ending, and his ending that he had in mind was a happy ending. And I said to him, why do you have a dilemma? And he said, because I think the happy ending is better for my word, but I don't want to change your story. And I said to him, you know what? You shoot the ending you think would make a better movie, and the day after you shoot it, you go back to your bookshelf and you take out my book and you see that my story didn't change at all. The only thing you're changing is your movie, you know. And I think that you know that when you write a story, you invite people for a dialogue and to say, yeah, no, this is this kind of conversation where I impose on you the ways that you need to understand my text. It's against the rules of the game.
Დინა თვითმეს კითხვის დასმა. მაშინ ერთ კითხვას დავსვამ უცბად და მე ისევ თქვენთან გადმოვად. მე მინდა იქიდან დავიწყო რომ მის ცოლს დიდი მადლობა გადაუხადოთ ყველა ჯერისთვის როცა არ მოусმინა სხვანაირად ჩვენ მის მოთხრობებს როგორც ჩანს ვერ წავიკითხავდით, ამიტომ დიდი მადლობა. უნდა შეუთვალოთ ჩვენი დარბაზის სახელით და ახლა მინდა დავსვათ ჩემი მეგობრის ნინო ნადიბაიძის შეკითხვა, რომელსაც მეც ვუერთდები სულით და გულით და ჩემცაც ძალიან საინტერესოა. ცოტა ციფრებზე და რიცხვებზე რომ ვილაპარაკოთ. თუ დაგითვლიათ ოდესმე რამდენი მოთხრობა გაქვთ დაწერილი და აი უცბად რომ მკითხოთ, შეგიძლიათ თუ არა ყველა მათგანის შინაარსი, ასე ვთქვათ, მოყვეთ.
Well, look, there are many stories that I've written that I never finished, or I finished and I never published, or I finished and I actually liked, but I lost them. You know, I'm not very organized, but I think that I've published more than 200 stories, and I think I remember all of them. It would be difficult if you tell me all the stories, and maybe I will forget one, but you know, I know them very well. I think there is something about the short stories that they are like a snapshot in a photo album. So you may forget that you had a photo, but if somebody shows you a photo, you remember the moment exactly. So if somebody tells me something about a story, I always remember it, not because I remember how I wrote it, but I remember to what part of my emotional word it's connected to.
აბა დარბაში გისმენთ.
ისმის მე მაინტერესებს ამჟამად თუ მუშაობს რამე ტექსტზე, ამჟამად საცხოვრობს და თუ ისე უწევს სხვადასხვა სამსახურებში მუშაობა გარდა სამწერლო საქმიანობისა თუ აკეთებს სხვა რამეს. და მაინტერესებს გრძელტანიან ტექსტებზე თუ მუშაობს ან თუ აპირებს რომ მომავალში გამოსცეს. ხო, ძალიან მინდა მადლობა გადავხადო მთარგმნელს, იმიტომ რომ პირველი გამოცემა მართლა ძალიან კაი ნათარგმნი იყო, ჩემი საყვარელი მოთხრობის კრებული გახდა, ეს ნებროთ მაგარი. მადლობა.
So I live in Tel Aviv. I've lived all my life in Israel. I actually, in all my life, I always say I'm like Immanuel Kant, only without the brains, because he lived in one place. In all my life, I lived in a 6-kilometer diameter. I never got any further than that. The truth is that my father, my late father, he always told me, he said, you seem to enjoy writing so much that you need to make a point not to be dependent on it for your living. Because he said, that if it's something that you both love and you make money out of, it's confusing, And I'm a professor in the university in Israel. And even as a writer, I did a lot of strange stuff that has to do with writing. Basically, I advised some project, and I did all kinds of strange things. And I always experiment with different genres. Me and my wife, we choreographed a dance, and we did stuff for film, and I did stuff for TV. So I always try to build myself some kind of structure that writing stories will always be a hobby. That it will never be something that anybody demands from it. Is that it would be something that I have to struggle and fight to have the time to do.
აი თქვენს თუ კარი მქონდათ შეკითხვა. გამარჯობა, ძალიან მიხარია რომ ეს განახდებს.
The microphone is turned off, so they can't interpret.
გამარჯობა, ამდენი ტყუილად ილაპარაკე. დიდი ბოდიში ყველას. ძალიან დიდი მადლობა მინდა უთხრა თარგმნელს, რომ ასეთი არაჩვეულებრივი კრებულები თარგმნა ქართულად და საშუალება მოგცა, რომ გაგვეცნო ბატონი კერეთი ეს უფრო ახლოს და მისი ნაწარმოებებით გვესიამოვნა. თვითონ ავტორსაც ძალიან დიდი მადლობა ესეთი განსხვავებული ნაწერებისთვის. ახლა მე მაქვს ერთი კითხვა. წეგან მართალია თქვა, რომ ის მთელი ცხოვრება ისრაელში ცხოვრობს, მაგრამ ვიცით, რომ ის მოგზაურობს კიდევაც, მაგალითად ის იყო მინსკში, კიევში და მაინტერესებს მისი მოგზაურობა ახდენს თუ არა შთაბეჭდილებას, შთაბეჭდილებას ახდენს რა თქმა უნდა, მაგრამ გავლენას ახდენს თუ არა მის ტექსტებზე. რაიმე სახით აისახება თუ არა მის ნაწარმოებებში, ან უბრალოდ შთაგონების წყარო მაინც თუ არის მისთვის. დიდი მადლობა.
Well, first of all, I think that my prime objective is not to write; it's to live. So the reason that I travel a lot is because I enjoy it. I don't see in it some kind of a tool to improve my writing, but I get to go to different places and to meet people and the thing I hate the most is to be a tourist, to be on a bus or to queue on the way, to be in the Eiffel Tower. And to be a traveling writer, it's the best excuse to travel because you always get to meet people and when you meet your translator, then even if you never met before, it's like you meet, your ex-wife, who ran away with your children because you have so much in common, emotionally, and I think that there is something about the traveling that I love, and I must say that something that is not less important than the traveling is the coming back home, because I think that the greatest enemy for humanity and for feeling is the force of inertia. Because I think that we tend to, when we are in one place, we tend to kind of get used to things that we shouldn't get used to. and we tend to lose our ability to be amazed at things that we should be amazed about. And one of the things that I really like the most about traveling is going back home. I need to go out and go in again just to be able to kind of authentically be reintroduced to my life, you know. So I feel that it's a great gift for me. You know that they did this project in school where they asked my son to talk about the profession of his parents and to tell and they have to say the good thing about it and the bad thing about it. So he said the bad things that you don't make a lot of money, but the good things that you get to see the world, and that all kinds of people that you've never met still love you, you know, without you meeting them. And I think that, you know, he summed it up in a way that I think no brochure could say it better. And I actually think, you know, it's the best. I wouldn't say job, but it's the best vocation in the world, you know, to do that.
Ედეხარ გაქვთ ვინმეს შეკითხვა? კი ბატონო.
რა მაინტერესებს, იცით, თქვა რომ ჰობი არის მისთვის, ჰობი არ არის ასაკურია, ნუ ძირითადი შემოსავლის წყარო არ არის. ანუ როგორ ხდება მისთვის წერის პროცესი? დიდხანს მუშაობს, პატარა ტექსტები გაქვთ, პატარა მოთხრობები, ანუ როგორი სამუშაო პროცესი გაქვთ ამ პერიოდში? ანუ სწრაფად წერთ, დიდხანს ამუშავებთ, აი ამ თითოეულ მოთხრობას თუ როგორ?
მე წორ კითხვა მაქვს და მე და სერტონტო მოწოდოთ.
Well, you know, I tend to compare writing a story to a trust fall. You know, I bet many of you don't know what's a trust fall. It's an American thing, you know, that when couples have problems in their marriage, they ask each of them to close his eyes and fall back, trusting their partner to catch them. And for me, there is something about writing a story, it's like a trust fall. I close my eyes and I fall back and I trust the story to catch me, you know. And many times it doesn't, you know. I wake up on the floor, I have a bump in my forehead, I wrote 6 pages that don't make any sense, and I say, okay, I shouldn't have trusted this story. But I think that the process of writing for me is really to kind of act in a way that I feel relaxed enough to sit down and write, just having some kind of an obscure emotion that I cannot name, and believe that a story will come out of it. That I just know a sentence or I just have an image, and I believe that a story will come out of it. And I think that, you know, if you look at most of the amazing things done by human beings, the essential thing there is to believe that you can do it. You know, I think, like, I mean, if I would be like a Neanderthal and another Neanderthal would come to me and say, how about we have this big box and we get into it and we go through and we fly to the moon, I say, come on, like, let's go kill another prehistoric creature. You know, why are you wasting my time? Let's look for fire. But I wouldn't believe that it's possible. You know, most of the things that human beings do, I'm not talking even on science, you know, you see those YouTube's movies of angry Japanese people that they smash bricks with their forehead. You know, if somebody would say, how about I smash a brick? I say it's impossible, you know. So I think that for me, the most important thing about writing is really this earnest belief that the story will come, you know. And again, you know, so many times it doesn't. But I think that when you believe it will come, you are liberated from this kind of a strain that many people have, that they write, that they need to know what's going on. You know, they need to know the plot, they need to know where the story is heading. And you basically, you say, you know what, like, I know I can write like this, but it's not fun, you know. It's not great fun. It's like going, I don't know, on a skateboard when wearing an armor, you know, to protect yourself if you fall. So I rather go on my skateboard, and if I fall, I hurt a knee, I scratch something, I hurt myself a little bit, but I have this kind of feeling that when it works, you know, it's magical, it's liberating.
Can you hear me? Okay. As you said, you work at Tel Aviv State University. So there is a sign that says, in case of missile alert, go to room number something. Have you ever heard a missile alert?
Well, actually, I teach the Ben Gurion University, which is in the south. So there are many more missile alerts than in Tel Aviv University, and I've been in sadly in quite a few missile attacks. I think that it's strange, but when you live in a certain reality, as I said, you become totally too comfortable with things that you shouldn't be comfortable with. It's like, when I was in Belarus, I said to people, whoa, it's fucking cold here. They say, is it? But, all their life they live there, they don't even notice that it's cold. So, I was born in the 67 war. I started going to school on the 73 war. I started going to high school on the Lebanon war. It's like all my life I can map them through the wars I've been through. Each of those wars I have experienced that are not horrible, I'm still here, but that I think that human beings should not experience. I really think, I think that this position where there is a missile attack and you tell your 6-year-old child lie on the ground and he refuses, and you know that you have 20 seconds to convince him to lie on the ground before a missile explodes. I think that, as human beings, we can think of something better than that. Sadly, many people around me don't think that, this reality can be changed, but it's a very sad thing that I must say that only when I became a parent I was able to observe it from some kind of an exterior perspective, because all my life, like I said, okay, I live in a place where people are nice, but sometimes we go and we bomb other cities and we kill people, and sometimes people bomb us and kill us, and I guess that's the way it goes. I don't know, some places, they have bad public transportation. This is what I have, and I didn't make a big deal of it. But when you have a child and you think of to what kind of a future your child is gonna grow up to. My son is 10 years old. He in his lifetime there were 4 wars. 2 of them he experienced on his flesh with missiles exploding around him. And as a parent, you say, that we can do better than that. There are so many things that we can do to change the reality around us, and not see this violence, that in the region as something that is some kind of an unchangeable law of nature. People in many parts of, it's funny because, many times I'm in conflicts with right-wing people in my country, which are currently the government, and I heard that, one of the right-wing leaders many years ago, he said, some conflicts can be resolved and some conflicts cannot be resolved. And he gave as an example 3 conflicts that cannot be resolved. It was about 35 years ago, okay? So the 3 conflicts that he gave as example was the Irish-British conflict, the conflict in South Africa around the apartheid, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He said these are conflicts that cannot be resolved. You look around you, there is no war in Ireland, and and people in Africa, they left the apartheid behind, and somehow we still are left with this only conflict in the world that people so strongly believe that it's a force of nature and that there is no way for solving it, and I tend to disagree with them.
ძალიან მიხარია კიდევ ერთხელ მადლობა. მე ვახსენე შეკითხვა. ის შავი იუმორი, სარკაზმი, რომელსაც თქვენ ტექსტებში ხვდებით, არ ტოვებ ისეთი ადამიანის შთაბეჭდილებას, რომელიც იმაზე ხალისობს, ასე ვთქვათ, სხვის ნერვებზე თამაშით, ასე ვთქვათ, ერთობა. მაგრამ რამდენად ხშირად მიმართავთ შავ იუმორს პირად ურთიერთობებში და თქვათ თუ გყავთ პროტოტიპი გმირი, რომელიც ძალიან გავთ თქვენს მოთხრობებში თუ არის ეს. დიდი მადლობა.
Well, I think I grew up on Jewish humor, and I think the idea about Jewish humor is really that when making a joke is basically an act of compassion. You make jokes about your family, you make jokes about your mother, your children, yourself. So this idea of making a joke on somebody is something that it doesn't necessarily supposed to alienate, because humor can alienate. But I was saying to Tamar that my late father said to me once that he said, I sat down and I read all the stories that you have that have a father in them. And I realized that I saw that in half of them, the father dies. In the other half, he's stupid. But I also felt that in all of them, you love me. And I think that this is the idea about humor. I think that humor is a way in which, in a strange, paradoxical way, you can both criticize and attack, but at the same time show great love. And I can say to you something about humor that, it's funny because my son likes it when I'm kind of I say stuff that is funny, and sometimes he goes to me and he says, "Come on, father, be funny, be funny." And you cannot be funny, And with me, I must say that I see humor very much as some kind of almost like a protection mechanism. I once said it's like an airbag in a car. That humor presents itself when you're in danger, So there is something, I think that many times, let's say, when I write a story and I feel that I reach a territory that can be totally pathetic, that it's maybe too emotional or sentimental, or that I feel like feel like a victim. So I think that there is something about the reflexiveness of humor that kind of saves me from myself, And I think that the thing with me is that usually I realize I made a joke only when people are laughing, and they say, yeah, I said something funny, yes, it was my idea, yeah, it was funny. But it's not as if I construct some kind of mechanism that creates an effect.
გამარჯობა. მე მაინტერესებს ამ კაპიტანი ამერიკა ახსენეთ და მაინტერესებს დღემდე კითხულობ თუ არა კომიქსებს, DC უფრო მოგწევთ თუ მარველი და კიდე თქვენი საყვარელი სუპერგეროები.
Pacha Goga.
Well, actually, I must say that I haven't read comics. I read comics today, but not superheroes. But people like Chris Ware, or Daniel Close, But I did read a lot of superhero comics when I was younger, and with me, I think it was less about the heroes and more about the writer, because I think that our characters, like Swamp Thing when Alan Moore had written its issues, or Daredevil when Frank Miller wrote Daredevil. There are all those kind of characters that. What I always loved was when you have a writer who take a character that you already know and that was many times born as a cliche and kept going as a cliche, and he kind of takes this myth and discovers some kind of a very original and different kind of humanity in it, Because I think that the challenge when you write comics is really, it's a kind of a neoclassicist challenge than a romantic challenge. Because, when I sit down and write a story, I make up a character, I make up a word, I make up everything. But when you write a comic book, then basically all the rules are made. You know who the good guy is, you know who the bad guy is, you know that the good guy is going to beat the bad guy in the end. All those kind of things. And there are some comic book writers and artists who found a way to be super creative and unpredictable inside those confines, and when I've as a younger person, when I would meet somebody like this, it would kind of blow up my mind. It would seem to me much more difficult than than writing a good story. And and I say, we talk about translation, and Tamar and me, we had when we first met, we had a conversation about translation. And I think it's like a comic book writer who writes good superhero stories. I don't think that they get the respect they deserve. And translators, who basically do something that I find in many ways more difficult than writing a story, because it's basically taking a story and kind of rewriting it in your own language, because language do not operate by the same code. I don't think that they get the same credit. I said to Tamar that I always say that translators are like ninjas. Why? Because you only notice their existence if they're not good. Because when you read a book and it's good, then it gives you the feeling that you read the writer, So there's something about the fact that it was written in another language that you totally ignore it. The only time when you think about the translator is when something doesn't work. So there is something about the translators that, when they do the most amazing job, people don't notice them. And the moment there is something that feels a little bit wrong, then people would be quicker to blame them than to blame the writer who had written the story. I've been in places where people say, this story is translated really badly because this and this. And I say, no, this is how I wrote it. It's actually translated very well, So I really feel that in my word, this kind of a hierarchy in which writers are up there and people who do creative functions that are really not less important. Screenplay writers, you can name many wonderful directors, you can name many wonderful writers, but how many screenplay writers can you name? We saw, I don't know, Blade Runner is an amazing movie, 12 Monkeys is an amazing movie. Who wrote them? I don't remember the name of the guy who wrote it. And I think that, maybe it's a responsibility of us as responsible art consumers to start respecting those people who enrich our life, but somehow they don't have a good publicist.
Tamar, შენ ქონდა ერთი შეკითხვა? დიდი ხანია უკვე გაქვს უბრალოდ.
ესე იგი, ეს წელიწადი არის ეთგარ კერეთის ახალი კრებულის გამოსვლის წელიწადი, უნდა გეკითხა, ხო იცი, თუ გინდა შევაერთოთ. და ეს არის 7 კარგი წელიწადი, ესე ქვია, რომ თარგმნოთ ქართულად. და როდესაც გავიგე ამ წიგნის გამოსვლის შესახებ, ანოტაციაში ეწერა, რომ ეს არის კერეთის პირველი არამხატრული ესეისტური ტექსტების კრებული. ხო, მაგრამ აი სან საინტერესოა ჩემთვის დავფიქრდი იცი რაზე უფრო სწორად რომ აი ამ კრებულში რამდენიმე ტექსტის წაკითხვის მერე უფრო სწორად ამ კრებულიდან დავფიქრდი იმაზე რომ ეს ტექსტებიც ძალიან გავს მის მოთხრობებს არა მარტო ესთეტიკის და რაღაც წერის მანერის თვალსაზრისით არამედ ამბების თვალსაზრისითაც რომელიც მის მოთხრობებშია ძალიან მსგავსია არ ვიცი თითქოს აი რაღაცნაირად გაჩერდა ლაპარაკი შეწყვიტა და მე თავიდან გააგრძელა ეგეთი განცდა თითქოს ერთ ამბავს ყვება სულ და კითხვა ცოტა ჩავხართ მაგრამ დაახლოებით ესე ჟღერს არის თუ არა ამ კრებულში რაღაცნაირად ხატრული ელემენტები ან იყო თუ არა ცდუნება იმისა რომ რაღაცები გაგეზვიადებინათ ამ ესეისტურ კრებულს გულისხმობ
Well, I think in these books there are like kind of I think 35 short pieces that are like on a timeline. It's called the 7 Good Years because it begins with the birth of my son, who was born in the day of suicide bombing, and ends with the death of my father. And I would say that out of those 35 pieces, there are 3 pieces that are consciously exaggerated, and for example, there is a piece there about the fact that my best friend in real life is called Uzi. His parents named him after the machine gun. I was saying to Tamar, it's like somebody here would call his child a Kalashnikov, it doesn't make much sense. But so he came to me and he told me that he has a friend who is in a very high-ranking position in the Israeli intelligence. And this guy told him that Ahmadinejad, in Iran, they're actually going to attack Israel. And that probably there will be huge damage, to Israel. and you know, maybe nuclear attack or something like that, and that it's going to happen in the next few months. And I remember that the next day, they called me from the bank and they said to me if I want to take a loan. And I said, when do I have to pay it? And they say in 12 months. I said, sure. And then I thought to myself, you know, if they're going to destroy us in 6 months, you know, come on, the bank can come look for me when I become a mutant with an eye in the middle of my head after, you know, then let them collect, you know. And this was it was one specific incident, you know, and I turned it into a story. You know, it's a story. In the story, me and my wife, we think all the time that because we're going to be destroyed, we don't need to wash our dishes or take out the garbage or do anything. And we keep promising people all kinds of things, knowing that Israel will be destroyed. And then I start having nightmares that we have peace with Iran, and that all the people that I promised things, they come and want to collect. So this is a story that, you know, I think I find it a part of my life because it was very real, but I consciously exaggerated it. But I would say, you know, there are 3 pieces like that, but the rest of the 32 pieces, they're exactly the way, or at least exactly the way that I remembered them. You know, I can't say it's the way that they happened, but it's exactly the way that I've remembered them.
ბოლო ორი შეკითხვა დარბაზიდან და დავამთავროთ. თუ გაქვთ ეს ბოლო ორი შეკითხვა, აი ერთი და ერთი უკან.
ჩემთვის ძალიან დიდი სიხარული არის ეთგართან შეხვედრა, უკვე იცის ამის შესახებ, მაგრამ მინდოდა ეს შეკითხვა დამესვა მისთვის, თვითონ თუ შეხვედრია საყვარელ მწერალს და როგორ ჩაიარა ამ შეხვედრამ.
Well, I must say that, you know, that also my wife, I keep talking about my wife, we're always opposite. So my wife, let's say, when I don't know, she likes Bob Dylan or Leonard Cohen, then she always have this kind of say, oh, would it be great if I met them? And I never have I don't have any urge to meet artists that I like. Because I think, you know, I like their books. You know, maybe they have they don't use deodorant and have a very strong body smell. Why? Like, you know, I want to read their book. I don't want to play football with them. You know, but I must say that, you know, that like, you know, my friends are my friends from childhood, and even though, let's say, when I come to festivals, I don't necessarily even like communicate with people. It's funny because I was once in a Sundance Institute workshop, and before I went there, my agent said it's good thing, you know, when you go there, you come back with new friends, you know. And I said, okay. And, you know, in the workshop, I worked with people that are like, I don't know, Sigourney Weaver, and you know, and many kind of famous filmmakers. And when I came back, and my agent said, do you have a new friend? And I said, yes. And he said, who are there? And I said, the driver and the guy who screens the film. So I'm not very good with that. But having said that, you know, there are a couple of writers that are very good friends of mine. And we talked about Jonathan Safran Foer, who is a very good friend of mine, and Nathan Englander, who's also an American writer. But for me, if I'm a friend of somebody who's a writer, I'm a friend of them in spite of the fact that they're writers. You know, because I really feel, let's say that there is something about being an artist that I think that the action of sitting in a room and making up a story, making up something that had never happened with characters that never happened, the one thing that it tells about you, that is some kind of compensation, that something is wrong with your life, you know. So by default, I don't think that artists make better friends or better lovers or better anything, you know. Sometimes I bump into an artist who's also kind of an amazing person, an amazing friend, but I have no special interest in that.
Yeah.
მოგესალმებით, მაინტერესებს რას გვეტყვის თანამედროვე ებრაული ლიტერატურის შესახებ და რომელი მწერლების წაკითხვას გვირჩევდა.
So I must say that, one thing that people tend to be confused, I don't know if it's true for Georgian audience, that there are Jewish writers and Israeli writers, and it's not the same, because, Israeli writers, they write in Hebrew, they usually live in Israel, and I must say that, that the identity of the Israeli and the Jew, not only that they are not similar, but in many senses they're opposite. Because if you think about this idea, this guy that I told you, Herzl, who wrote this science fiction book, his idea in the book was that they will create a country for Jews to cure Jews from their Jewishness. Really, the idea was that, Jews living in Europe, in many countries, they were not allowed to farm their land, they were not trusted with some jobs, so they were kind of imposed to become lawyers, to become bankers, to become doctors, because this was their best way of surviving in this society. And Herzl believed that if they live in their own country, they'll become farmers, they'll do all those kind of normal things. Now, the idea is that in the Israeli ethos, Israelis are supposed to be the anti-Jew, in that sense that the Jew is a weak, spiritual, not necessarily pragmatic, while, if the Jews are the people of the book, in Israel what we say is that we're a high-tech nation, It's the opposite, If the Jews always took the leader as somebody who's a spiritual leader, the leaders in the Israeli states are usually ex-generals, So there is a lot of tension between those two words views. I think that, there are some amazing contemporary Israeli writers. I think the most famous writer worldwide, and for very good reason, is Amos Oz. He's an amazing writer. There are less known writers like Orly Kastelblum and Yoel Hoffman that are also amazing writers. And apart from that, there are many great Jewish writers, operating. So, there are people from the generation of Philip Roth, but I mentioned, that Jonathan Safran Foer is a friend of mine, but he's also an amazing writer, and the same goes for Nathan Englander, Gary Steingart. There are many great, I think, American Jewish writers. There are some of them that are less known, like Todd Hazak Lawi, and I could think of many other names. But for me, I always felt actually closer to the Jewish diaspora writers than to the Israeli writers. I think that what I'm saying is very reductive, but I think that the Israeli writers usually tell the story of the group, the story of the people, while the Jewish writers many times they tell the story of the outsider, of the misfit, of the ones that does not belong or cannot connect to this kind of a collective identity. And in my natural instinct, I'm always like that. It's enough for me to be with two people in a room to feel like a minority. I always tend to find myself not part of the mainstream. So this is something that I more easily recognize in the Jewish diaspora writing tradition, from Kafka and other writers and on.
მე მგონი დავასრულეთ. დიდი მადლობა ბატონ კერეთს მისი მოთხრობებისთვის და სტუმრობისთვის. დიდი მადლობა თამარ ბაბუაძეს მისი თარგმანისთვის. მე თავში დამავიწყდა რომ აღმენიშნა მას მეორე მთარგმნელი წავს ბატონი მამუკა ბუცხრიკიძე, რომელსაც პირველად ივრითიდან თარგმნა მისი ორი მოთხრობა, სანამ თამარ ბაბუაძე შეეჭიდებოდა და აუცილებლად უნდა მეთქვა ეს და ისევ ჩემი მღელვარების გამო დამავიწყდა და ბოდიში მთარგმნელს და დიდი მადლობა და რა თქმა უნდა მადლობა თქვენ. დიდი იმედი მაქვს ჩვენ საყვარელ მწერლებთან დავბრუნდებით ლიტერატურულ კლუბში ძალიან მალე. მადლობა.